Hello, hello, here we are again. We're coming to you from Broadcast Team Alpha on 44 different platforms around the world. And this is the show for the thinking global citizen that is not afraid to stick his toe outside of the box and find out what is out there that I don't know about. And you are going to find out that you may not even want to go back. There's so much interesting stuff out there. And yeah, my name is Aage, and I'm going to be the host tonight. And my co-host Nori just couldn't make it tonight. There is other things going on. She is also in business. So here we are, and we are also transmitting on the Conscious Awakening Network. And you got to go visit those guys. They have close to 50 different shows on there, different uh, di different shows with hosts. And there's some really interesting stuff going on. So go ahead and Google Conscious Awakening Network. You can also find them on YouTube with the same name. And of course, that is consciousawakeningnetwork.org. And before I introduce the guest, I want to tell you how you can get a hold of me and get a hold of Nori. Just go to broadcastteamalpha.com and you'll find the contact feature there. So send us an email and we will get the email. We'll get back to you and we'll see what we can do for you. And if you are watching on YouTube right now, that's the place to be because that's the only place we can monitor the chat room, and you can put questions in there, and we'll see what we can do. We with my co-host not being here, I may be a little slow on that, but just get there anyway. And also, I want to say Nori and I put together a spiritual think tank. We're doing some incredible things. Sometimes it seems like we are creating out of seemingly nothing and bring it into existence in the physical. Because there is a way to communicate with the universal mind using a spiritual language. It's not one of words, but it's different and it works. So if you want to come and check out something that is bigger than ourselves, send us an email to themastermindconnection@gmail.com. And I will send you some information. I'll send you a link to come and check it out on Sundays at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, East Coast time, and it's 11 o'clock in California Pacific. So, and of course, if you like what you hear tonight, the super chat is open. That's just like Christmas Eve in August. So anyway, I want to introduce the guest to you, and he sent me his bio, and I lost myself in it. There was so much on there. I have to shorten this down a little bit in order for us to be able to hear him a little bit too in this show. We have Terry Tibando with us, and he has written several books, I think 6 books or so. And you can Google that, you can find them. It's on Amazon, a lot of different places. Citizens Disclosure on UFOs and ETI, that is extraterrestrial intelligence. And there's some really interesting stuff in there. I think you should go have a look at. We are going to talk about World War II German and American flying discs. When did they start out making those things they haven't told us about? Where are they? What are they? And maybe a little bit about how do they work? Because this is something that you won't find in mainstream anywhere. And we're going to talk give you a little skinny on this one. Also, he is an active UFO and ETI researcher and one of Canada's leading experts on what is going on in the skies. He had his own experiences, and he spoke at the National MUFON Symposium here just really recently, I think about middle last month or so. And he's been on the Discovery Channel TV stations and many radio and podcasts all over the place. And you will find him on Facebook. Go and look at it. There is some really interesting stuff in there. There are testimonies from people that have had first-hand knowledge of government technology into UFOs and related areas. So, he's also going on the Contact at Sea cruise, going from Northwest up to Alaska. So if you want to be part of a cruise where you can get to associate with some of the most leading thought leaders and UFO and extraterrestrial researchers in the world, go to YouTube, because he's got a page on there where he explains how you can be part of that. And I bet you would have so much fun, you probably would think it would be illegal. So anyway, welcome to the show, Terry.
Thank you very much, Aage, for inviting me on your show.
Yeah. I did say that you had some personal experiences also. And there are many people out there that have had that, but they don't dare to talk about it because there is still a stigma around it. Even though it's becoming more and more mainstream, the stigma is there. And a lot of people have had the experiences, don't dare to talk about it. Speak on that, but your experience and the reason maybe why people shouldn't be bashful about having these experiences. Bring it out there.
Well, thank you very much. I have had experiences since I was a 5-year-old child. Now that's 1953. So this is dating me. I'm going to be 76 this year. And so I've had experiences throughout my lifetime, whether it's UFO of different configurations or it's ET encounters. And my ET encounter when I was 5 years old was in St. Jean, Quebec, on an RCAF military base, very small. And essentially what happened was my mother and I had been out taking a walk in the early November morning, and we were going along the one of the roads on the airbase, and there were buildings there, probably military office type buildings, and I saw this craft that was essentially what I thought was some Mexican sombrero hat, and it was kind of wobbling a little bit, and it kind of hovered over one of the buildings. I estimate somewhere between 500 and 700 feet away, so it was reasonably close. And I said to my mother, "What's that?" And she looked up at it, and she really didn't know. And she says, "I think it's some kind of airplane." And all of a sudden, it took off. Now, this was your typical disc where it was dark underneath, had a convex surface, and a dome or cupola on the top, silverish. And so the closest one that I can think of would be a photograph that was taken, I think, in New Jersey. So, and that was back in the 50s or 60s. The interesting thing about that is that within a few days of that sighting, I had ET beings come into my bedroom. Now, I'll pull up a share screen and I'll show you what that looks like. If I can.
Yeah, you have some incredible pictures, and a lot of those pictures we're also going to show in the last half of this show. And here we go on some of it. Yeah.
So this is what I saw. I refer to them as Casper the ghost-like ET beings. Now, people will say, well, oh, that's the short little grays. Well, nobody was talking about short little grays back in 1953. They were talking about the tall, blonde, blue-eyed Nordic beings that came from Venus, who somehow or coincidentally spoke with a German accent.
Yeah,
So
isn't that?
I suspect that that wasn't real Venusians. But what I saw were these beings, and they literally came right through the wall. And they did this not once, but 3 times. And on the first time, I was freaking out. I called my mother in. She said, "What's going on?" I said, "I'm seeing little ghosts or little men behind the door of my bedroom." Now, I shared this bedroom with my twin brother and my younger baby brother who's sleeping in a crib. And I said, "Go and check behind the door." And so she did, but she didn't see anything. They weren't there. And I thought, well, this is weird because I saw them. I knew what I saw. And so she calms me down. She says, "I think you're just having a bad dream." And then she leaves the room. Within a minute or two of her leaving the room, again, they reappear. Now I'm really freaking out. I'm calling out. I'm waking up the whole house. She comes back in, I think somewhat annoyed. And she said, "What's going on?" I said, "They're back. They're back. Take a look." And so again, she looked and she couldn't see anything. And she said, "This is a bad dream. You're just having a nightmare. I want you to think about Christmas, which isn't too far away at that time." And she said, "Think about the Christmas tree and the presents you're going to get and all the rest of it." And you know, she spent 10 minutes calming me down. She then left, and I looked again at the door and I didn't see anything. And I thought, well, maybe I am dreaming. And then at that moment that I thought I was dreaming, here they are again. This time they're walking around the edge, the bottom of my bed, and up to where I'm sleeping. So I pull the covers over my head, thinking that if I can't see them, they can't see me, therefore they're not there. So that's the thinking of a 5-year-old. And
Yeah.
at some point I fell asleep, but something in the back of my mind said that the covers came off me. Now, the next morning, my twin brother was teasing me and said, "You just had a bad dream. I didn't see anything, you know," and that's all it was. And I think my mother sort of reiterated the same thing. But what I found was I started to draw pictures of stars, planets, and rocket ships, which is not something I would have really known much about, but that's what I was
Yeah.
drawing. So that's usually an indication that a child has had some traumatic event that has really impacted their psyche. And
Yeah.
that was my first experience. And then from that point on, depending on where I live, I would have all kinds of other experiences, whether it would be UFOs flying close to my home, or maybe I'm out in a park area and would see some flashes of light, etc. So that was my first experience.
Yeah, and a lot of times these experiences follow the family. So, did they talk about any kind of contact at all?
Well, the fact that my mother and I saw a flying saucer during the daytime, that was a shared experience. My father, back in 1951, had the whole family had moved back east, and we lived in Victoria, British Columbia, and my father had left the army because that's what he was in as a serviceman during the war, and he enlisted in the Air Force. And so I guess before he took on the service of being a military man in the Air Force, he flew back to see his parents who lived in Toronto. And I imagine it was by military transport. So he lands at Moulton Air Base in Ontario, which is now a part of Pearson International Airport. And he's stepping off of the ladder or the steps, and he sees a hangar in front of him. And the doors are open, and he sees a disc-shaped craft hovering, and it comes out onto the tarmac, hovers there momentarily, and then shoots straight up in the air, and hovers there again momentarily, and comes back down and goes back into the hangar. Now, he said up to his dying days that he saw a flying saucer in 1951. The question here is, what did he see? Did he see an actual extraterrestrial craft that somehow the Canadians had captured and were experimenting with it? Or was it part of a German capture that the Allies had that and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but during the end of the war in 1945, the Americans went in along with the Allied nations, Canada, France, Britain, and other nations to capture German technology and bring it back and find out what's going on with it, along with about 1,600 German scientists. So it is conceivable that this was a German craft, and if it was, the only thing that would fit that description would be a viril, or what they call a yaga, hunter, a disc-shaped craft. So the thing about that is that he drew a picture of showing a disc, like two saucers lip to lip, and I found it actually in a cannon shell humidor where he kept his tobacco, and I asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, you don't need to know about that." Well, later on, he did reveal to me exactly what it was about, and so that's part of that scenario.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier also that there was a German accent in some of those pilots that flew the discs, and that is actually, I read about that too, and in fact, the retired Colonel Wendell Stevens here in Tucson, I had talks with him about it, and he thinks that Adamski, you know, back in the 1950s, he didn't have any contact with people from Venus, but they were Germans coming out of the Antarctica base 211. What do you think?
Yeah, I believe that. I got a document, and basically it's from the CIA, and I think it's dated around, I think it's either 1951 or 1953. And basically in the document, towards the bottom of it, it said that there is a psychological potential to use this as a weapon against the people in public or other nations. And so what I think was happening was that when the Americans captured some of these flying discs, there was a catch-up period of trying to understand how they flew. They were literally thinking outside of the box when they were constructing the propulsion systems, and let alone the very fact that it was disc-shaped. And the Americans didn't understand that technology, and there's a reason for it, which we'll get into. But they were able to fly the craft because I believe they had conventional navigation controls, etc., much like a bomber, whether that was a Lancaster bomber or B-26 bomber, and it would be manned by, you know, half a dozen, 4 to 6 men to operate it, and plus whatever people were using the cannons on board to shoot at other aircraft. So the thing is, I think that when they started to test fly these Viril and Haunebu type craft, that they were able to fly them, but they didn't understand it. And then in 1953, they had a major breakthrough in electrogravitics and anti-gravity. And that's when everything started to come together. Now, you have to understand that the Germans had this knowledge before the war, before World War II. And they were already designing and building these things and testing them out. And they were doing it on basically a privatized and a sort of uh, one or two factories were building these things, and it wasn't until the Third Reich got involved, the SS, that they said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to standardize the types of craft that we're building, and there will be improvements along the way. Well, as I was saying, that the Americans didn't understand it, but eventually they did, because they figured out the propulsion system. Part of this was a shoot down program where there were extraterrestrial craft coming into Earth orbit and even landing. And in one or two instances, there were some form of engagement with humans. Usually the outcome for the extraterrestrials were their craft was shot down and was captured and retrieved, and then they started to reverse engineer a lot of that. So Germany did this in around 19, well, it actually begins with Maria Orsic back in 1919, and by 1922 she was getting all kinds of channeled and medium type messages from a star system known as Aldebaran, which is about 68 light years away. And essentially she was a part of the Viril Society, where young women like her with very long hair would be doing mediumship and channeling and getting all kinds of information. And by around 1922, they started to get channeled information on actual construction of craft. So whatever they were receiving, it was enough information for them to go on. And the Thule Society got involved because part of the text that they were getting was in a language they didn't understand. They thought it was Old German or Template German, but in fact it was Sumerian. And that's where the Thule people got involved in it, because they had people who could read it. And then they started to realize, oh, this is very interesting. An ancient language of our past is suddenly showing up now, and it's in the hands of the Germans. And so essentially they utilized all this information. And as I say, one thing began with individuals, various scientists and what have you got involved and started building certain dish-shaped craft that were either jet-powered or had some form of engine in it, but it wasn't yet formulated into the solid state type of propulsion, which I think involved mercury of some kind.
Yes, it did.
Yeah, and so that's part of all of that. You know, we talked about Wendell Stevens and Henry Stevens, no relation, wrote a number of books about this, and he said that there was an advancement in design and construction of these craft. They got more and more complex and larger as it went on. So we find that going down that path, there was an involvement of the Honebu and the Viril and other craft.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, Germany had their own Roswell in 1936, when there was a rather large craft that crashed in Bavaria.
Yes, in the Black Forest.
Yeah, and in 1939, 3 years later, they had it back engineered enough so they could create their own. There was some note in Colonel Stevens's paper saying that they spent a long time trying to get into the craft. They tried everything, including explosives, and nothing worked until somebody pushed on the outside somewhere on the surface, and bingo, the door came open.
Mm-hmm.
After trying all the other.
Well, they apparently found that there were beings still alive on or near the craft, and so they took all of this back to the Wewelsburg Castle, and basically, with the help of the ETs, either willingly or unwillingly, they helped to reverse engineer the craft. and based on also their documents and then whatever other things that the scientists were able to put together, piece together in their own way. So there was a sort of a terrestrial, extraterrestrial amalgamation of technology that eventually evolved. Let's get into some of the pictures, and I'll show you.
Yeah, yeah, please, yeah.
Okay, let me just pull this up here, and
yeah. I want to say just a little bit about the Haunebu's, because they developed it from the Haunebu 1, 2, 3, and also the controversial number 4.
right.
The Haunebu 1 was unstable. It kept crashing on them, so they ran out of pilots that would dare to fly it. So they kind of put that one on hold, and they developed the Haunebu 2 out of that. And I want to say just a little bit about the specs that I got from Colonel Stevens. The Haunebu 2 were 26 meters across, that's 76 feet, and it was called the V7. And I still wonder where the V6, 5, and 4 is. But they had magnetic directional impulse as a steering, and it could do anywhere from 6,000 kilometers an hour at sea level and 21,000 at higher levels. And they had double hull and a crew of 9, 6 cannons, and they also had something called the Pristron tube, which was a directional EM pulse. When they aimed that at an aircraft and triggered it, they burned up all the electronics in that aircraft. The engine stopped, and down they went. And this technology, it was obviously to the Allied forces that when they start seeing these, we can still lose the war. So they engineered the invasion in Normandy, and that was thrown together. It couldn't have been worse than they did it.
Yeah, yeah. The thing about it, like what I want to do is sort of start with the presentation, because I want to show that this is a diagram of the solar system with the various planets, and on the bottom we see what astronomers postulate as the zone of habitability. In other words, Mercury and Venus are really, fairly close to the sun and are considered too hot to be hospitable. Then you have somewhere beyond Venus towards Mars, what is considered the ideal location to have planets that will have life forms on it. And then beyond
Goldilocks.
Goldilocks zone, right. And so beyond that, you get planets that are gaseous like Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. And so they're not considered habitable. Now, you got to understand that this is what I call a medieval anthropocentric type of thinking that even though you recognize that the sun is the center of our solar system and the planets go around it, you're still thinking that life has to look like humans. It doesn't. And so that's what they postulate. Now, above, I found that in my research, I was studying what religions say about life in the universe, and one of the religions was the Baha'i faith that states that a stable star determines the zone of habitability. And there's a quote to that. And the quote goes that, "Know thou that every fixed star," meaning stable, "hath its planets, and every planet hath its creatures, whose number no man can compute." So what they're saying is you have a stable star like we do, which we call Sol. Therefore, all the planets in our solar system, which are now stable, have life on them in one form or another. Now, people will debate this, but the very fact that we've got a planet that has all kinds of life forms, including extremophile life forms, life that can exist deep down in the ocean, near volcanic vents, or in the ice, or 300 feet in the ground, or in other environments, all of which are hazardous or non-sustainable to humans. But there's life there. So what that indicates is, here's an example of the Earth having these extreme cases of life that we know, not only terrestrial landforms, aquatic, avian, things that live under the ground as well. So now we're looking at extremophiles, and according to the Baha'i faith, there is life in all the stars, all the planets. That means wherever we go in the universe, if there's a stable sun, it will probably have planets, and those planets will have life, including the moons or satellites that revolve around those planets. So that's the pieces that we're coming from.
Yeah, I'm not so sure it's only the Baha'i faith that says that. Do you remember the guy 2,000 years ago that said, "In my father's house there's many rooms"?
Many mansions, right? Well,
many mansions. Okay,
that's right. Yeah, and that's a term that indicates. Now, how could you have a mansion inside of a house? Because a house is smaller than a mansion. So there's a kind of a spiritual allegory there that needs to be understood. But I'm not going to delve a lot into religion about this. I'm just sort of throwing this up, and it's up to the science to either prove or disprove this postulation that the Baha'is are putting out there. And so I'm saying that I think that that's a valid statement that needs to be researched. Now, when we get into the German stuff, because they actually had contact by not only a crash, as you mentioned earlier, in the Black Forest of Bavaria in 1936 or 39. Was it 39?
Yeah, 39.
Yeah, and they saw creatures that they were still alive, and they helped the Germans to create some of their craft. Now, here we have what they call the Glock, the bell.
Wait, just a second. For those of you that joined us late in the show here, we are talking with Terry Tibando, and we are talking about the German and the American Flying Discs programs. And we are going through some pictures here. The one on the screen right now is the German Nazi Die Glocke, and that's called the bell in English. And there's some really interesting stories about that Terry's going to tell us about here in about 4 seconds.
Well, you know, a lot of people say, well, this was a flying craft. It was a flying craft of sorts. It was more of a proof of concept because it was proving that the concept of propulsion could actually levitate this craft and move it around. And once you develop the understanding of that propulsion, then you can take it and you can put it into any other craft of any configuration that you wanted. So if you look at the next picture, for instance, here we have various Viril. Now, I probably have mistakenly called this a Viril 7, but I think Viril 7 would apply to the whole flying saucer type program or to a particular craft. But these were known as Viril. And you can see that some of them were actually used in actual combat. And the picture on the top left shows a craft in the background with a car. This is only half of the picture. I've seen the whole picture. And unfortunately, I wasn't smart enough to download the whole picture, but I know what's there. And if anybody has the complete picture, please contact me. I'm at tibando@telus.net, and you can send me the photograph and information. I can tell you that the other half of that picture has a German soldier standing with his arm up against the car. That I know for a fact. And it may be that his identity is very apparent. That's why they removed that portion of the photograph.
I think I have that whole picture on our website, broadcastteamalpha.com, in the picture gallery. It is in there somewhere. There's over 100 pages and 5,000 unbelievable pictures. I don't know where it is, but I'll look for it.
Well, if you got it, please send it to me, because it would help to complete, you know, this whole dissertation and this historical information. Moving on, and of course, what I was saying about the propulsion system was incorporated into these craft, and these were known as Viril. In the next photograph is the prototype for the Haunebu class of German saucers. And you'll note that it's more streamlined. And there's a reason for that, because it was flying in the atmosphere. Now, they generated a field around the craft from the propulsion system. So it probably wouldn't have much of an impact on the craft as it moved around. In fact, it probably would have actually left the Earth's atmosphere as well, meaning that it could travel into space. And in fact, when you are moving through space, you're not encountering friction of any kind. So a brick would fly quite well in space. But if you bring it into the atmosphere, it's going to meet all kind of heat resistance and friction. So this is why I think that they went and developed these more curved type lines of this. And this was the Haunebu Thule. And then in the next one is the WW2 Dostra, which is probably being serviced because there are people around it, and maybe they're servicing the cannons that are around this craft. This was probably the one that was at least, I'm guessing here, 45 to 50 feet in diameter. It could have been a bit larger. They had a number of different types of Haunebu 2.
Yeah, and they had six cannons on it.
Yeah, some on the top.
I had on another computer, I had a test results from the test flight. It went from the surface to 60,000 feet in 3 minutes, straight up against gravity.
They were absolutely remarkable. I mean, I'm not pulling out all the statistics on this because we would run over twice as long on this presentation, but I wanted just to let people know what was actually built at that time. This is a Haunebu 3, and the craft that I was mentioning to you earlier, Aage, is this Messerschmitt 163E Comet rocket plane. As a child on the airbase in Quebec, St. Jean's, Quebec, my brother and I actually found one of these on the tarmac in front of a small hangar, and it was unguarded, nobody was around, and my brother and I went over it and started playing with it. The tiny little propeller on the front, probably 18 inches, if that, and we were running our hands all over it, looking at it with rather amazement, and we found that the cockpit was open. And so we flipped it open and we climbed inside, taking turns playing with the joystick. Now, I think it wasn't going to go anywhere because I think that whatever fuel was there was probably removed. But these craft were designed to take off on a short runway, go straight up into the atmosphere, and if there were enemy aircraft coming over, they would then dive down on them, strafing them with bullets. And if they were fortunate enough, they may have got a second chance to go up again and repeat that action before they had to land. There was only about 15 to 20 minutes of fuel, and they acted like a glider. When they ran out of fuel, they came in like a glider, because this was actually a glider at one time, but they installed a rocket into it. And this thing could travel about 600 miles an hour. So it gives you an idea of the kind of technology that the Germans were building. And it just so happened that this particular craft adds credence to this image here. That this isn't Photoshop. There are people with I don't know if you can see this, but there's a lighted area on the bottom that's open where people are actually going up into it. And there's another one near the middle where they're also entering into it. So this was a large sort of battleship type craft. And here you see the same thing. This time it's in flight. And there are two German soldiers in the foreground. And basically what we're looking at here is it's in flight, and in the background are mountains. So we know that they had taken some of their craft and flew it around the countryside, probably as a test flight to see how it operated.
Yeah.
Now, the next thing that they were building was what they called the Andromeda Gurat, or a device, and it was about a 700-foot long cigar-shaped craft. They built two, and they named them after Norse gods, Freya and Freya. And essentially, I think it was the Freya, the female goddess version, that was actually built and flown. And in the photograph on the left is a small disc-shaped craft that also appears, which may have been one of the Vril or the Hanabu craft that came off the inner hangar of this cigar-shaped craft. Here on the right is a colored version of the same thing taken by somebody else by the name of Joe Ferrer in 1967 in Rhode Island, New York. What
Yeah.
again it shows is that these craft were being test flown after the war, which means that if the Americans have captured this, then this is part of their experimentation and learning to control these craft to see what they could do. Now, as we find that as we move through it, we get a lot of reports of Foo Fighters that were moving along Allied aircraft. Even the Axis aircraft of Germany were seeing these, and they weren't completely certain who they were, what they were, etc. And so there was a lot of debate afterwards of just whose were they, and in all likelihood, they were also of German design. And this shows a couple of examples of what they probably looked like. They generated a field around them so that they would tend to glow a sort of orange or green, and they would interfere with the navigation of the aircraft because of the electromagnetic energy that was coming off it. Now, that's the key point, because when you see other aircraft, when you hear about other reports of UFOs in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s, etc., you hear about a person driving along, and all of a sudden their car comes to a stall. It just stops altogether because it's being interfered by electromagnetic radiation, which comes off of these craft. Not these particular ones, but larger craft. And so these larger craft can interfere with your home, your car. They can interfere with the power lines that generate or send electricity into cities and homes. And they can short circuit that until they move off, and then all that power comes back on again, as if nothing happened. Now, this is a picture of the Hanabu fleet, and you can see up in the top left corner is the Vril prototype, which was a one-man craft. Then they built others that were larger, still one man, sometimes two-man craft. And then they went into what they called the Vril reconnaissance type of craft, which was more sleek. And I believe that that's what my father saw, was this smaller one-man craft that could hover, and it could take off vertically and land vertically. That seems to fit the description. But we have no proof of that. There was no, he didn't mention that he saw any German insignia on it. So the thing is, the research that needs to be done is to find out whether or not we actually had that craft. We know that Dr. Heinrich Richard Metheny came to Canada in around the 1950s. He may have actually came in much earlier than that to sort of accommodate or be in the presence of this particular craft. He's also believed to have helped John Frost of APRO Canada, who he was a British aeronautic designer who worked in Canada to develop the APRO Aero and the APRO car, which was sort of a round disc hovercraft type of vehicle. And then it got off the ground about 3 or 4 feet, and it was wobbly and unstable, but they did actually work out the stabilization problem of that craft. But that
Yeah.
was a prototype for something else they were working on. The thing that was in Moulton, Ontario, where they were building the Avro Aero and the Avro car. The other highly powered jet disc craft was being built in Georgetown, west of Toronto, and that was like a 6 jet engine disc-shaped craft, as well as and that was referred to as the WW2 craft, and then the other one they were building was the spade-shaped Manta or Omega type craft, where the central jet was right in the center of it, and it was like the mouth or of the shape of a shovel with a spade-like appearance to it. And it is believed that all of these flew at some point. They were prototypes being built for the American Army Air Force at the time.
Yeah.
So what this shows is the different configurations and the involvement of the craft. The one that's labeled Vril 7 was also considered an interstellar craft. And essentially what it would do is it would create a high magnetic field in the front of it. And this would open up what the Germans refer to as a white hole. And they realized that if they were going to try and make contact with the Aldebaran star system, 68 light years away, they couldn't travel there at the speed of light. They had to get there much faster. And it is believed that one of the Andromeda garrots or devices actually made a travel. We don't know if it went to that star system, but apparently on its return, it had a quadruple Victylin steel shell around it. And they said it was weathered and beaten up to the point it looked like it was 100 years old. So that means they must have put it through some extreme environment or lack of environment, and whatever happened along the way, they were able to return, but the craft was somewhat damaged in the process. It's also believed that the Germans may have gone to the moon, and they may have gone to Mars several times. I have a photograph that shows a base on Mars, but I'm not thinking it's German, but probably American, because the environment of the buildings and the solar cells and the radar dish, etc., look too modern to be of pre-war or post-war development.
Yeah, could you show us that?
I don't have it loaded up, unfortunately.
Oh, okay.
But I can send that to you. I'm not even certain that the one that I've got was the one that I originally saw back in around 2009, 2010, when I was writing my books. So, but you know, I can certainly dig that out for you, Aage. And then one of the interesting things here, we have Herman Oberth's comment that he says, we cannot take credit for our record of advancement in certain scientific fields alone. We've been helped. When asked by whom, he replied, the people from other worlds. So very cryptic, very sort of oh, what's this all about sort of thing. You have to understand something here. When Maria Orsic and the Vril Society were doing channeling and receiving information, it turns out that many years later, the American military, through cooperation of Stanford Research Institute, developed a group of remote viewers known as Project Stargate or Grill Flame. Yep. And they were remote viewing not only enemy territory and weapons and all the rest of it, but some of them were able to remote view what they thought were life on Mars. And I'm involved with CSETI, which is the Center for the Study of Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And guess what we did? We use remote viewing, high meditation, and we make we have contact with extraterrestrial intelligence. They will actually show up and start to interact with us. And we're not asking for information from them at this point. We're just merely establishing a relationship with them. But we're doing this something like 60, 80 years after the fact that it was first done prior to World War II.
Yeah.
So again, it's catch up to what the Germans had been doing. Had the Germans succeeded in their development of the saucers and the V2 rockets and everything else, this might have been a whole different world we're living in. Fortunately, it didn't happen that way. The Allies won the war.
Absolutely. And we interviewed, Nori and I interviewed Russell Targ that ran the CIA program on that. And he explained this is absolutely real. It was there.
Yeah, it's information that is being kept very quiet. It's still a lot of the information that was gained from the Second World War is still kept in dark black vaults away from the public, because if we really knew the truth, we would be demanding all kinds of things from our governments and sort of a halt to the military exercise of what they're doing. I want to move through this fairly quickly because there's still a fair amount to cover, but in this photo here, they talk about the Tic Tacs and UAPs and USOs off the coast of California, and how they're buzzing the ships and all the rest of it. And they say, we don't know who they belong to. We don't know if they're extraterrestrial, whether they're Russian or Chinese. Well, I'm saying that that's not honest truth. That's a bold-faced lie. They know exactly what these are. They've known about it since the Second World War, and they knew about it during a NATO operation on North Atlantic called Exercise or Operation Mainbrace. And there was a photographer on board the ship who was photographing some of this stuff back in 1952. And his name was Wallace Littman. And you can see there's a colored photograph with an arrow pointing to what looks like what we would refer to today as a Tic Tac. But in the other black and white photographs, I've circled what these objects were. And there even seems to be something in the sea in the forefront of one particular photograph. So the Navy and the military knew about this. In fact, not just the US Navy, but 9 major navies at the time were seeing this stuff. We're talking about 200 international ships, 10,000 sailors or soldiers, 200 aircraft, and they were doing these wartime operations to show that they could defend Denmark and Norway from the possible Russian invasion. And while they were doing this, they were seeing these objects coming out of the ocean, flying over, buzzing the ships, and then taking off into space. 1952, they knew back then what they were. So they can't say they didn't know that they were extraterrestrial. And even Eisenhower and Churchill had discussed this whole issue because they realized they were dealing with something other than man-made craft.
Yeah.
Now, what did the Americans get from all of this? Well, they have been doing a shoot-down program of anything extraterrestrial flying into the atmosphere. And in some cases, these craft would land, and allegedly there was an exchange of information and technology between military people and extraterrestrials. This is the famous Bob Lazar sports model flying saucer that he claimed he worked on. Very clean lines, very sleek, no nuts or bolts in its construction. When you look at other craft, what you start to see is lots of plates, bolts, constructions, bits and pieces sort of protruding from it in one way or another. And this indicates a man-made construction. So the difference now is, how do you tell an extraterrestrial craft from a man-made craft? Extraterrestrial craft are physical, but more often than not, they are appearing in a trans-dimensional appearance. In other words, they can be seen physically, but they're not there physically. Your eyes can see it, but they're not there. They're altered, they're phased out of our existence. And there's a reason for that, because when they travel from one star system to another, they're not traveling at the speed of light. They're traveling through various dimensions to get here. That may mean that they're opening up a porthole of some kind and traveling through it, and they get there within minutes, not hours, not days, not weeks, not months, not years, literally within minutes. That's true even if they are a galactic civilization coming, say, from Andromeda to our planet. They'll do it in a matter of minutes. It's that quick. This is the Pumpkin Sea, which is part of Lockheed's Project Diamond. It was to show the concept of a aerospike technology. This craft could do about Mach 14 plus. Very, very fast. We're talking about like 10 to 15,000 miles an hour, which is about the same speed as a rocket. In the next picture, we're seeing a triangular shaped craft. Now, I do have my doubts if this is the genuine craft on the ground, because the shadows don't quite line up with the men around it. So this could be just a virtual or a CGI or AI construction, but it's fairly accurate. And this is a craft that is based on the B-2 stealth bomber. So whatever the B-2 stealth bomber can do, like it flies with jets, but it also has an electrogravitic leading edge on it, as does this. But this is designed to do that all over the craft, not just in one section. So this is based on reports and observations and some photographs. The next photograph shows what they call a man-made ARD craft, which was photographed by a pilot over Provo, Utah, in 1966. All this stuff in the construction of this craft can be gotten off the shelf. In other words, when you look at the little black bubbles on the craft, these are cameras that you would find in a casino. This gives them the eyes to see what's outside of the craft. There's oxygen tanks, there's a central pillar, there's chairs that they sit in. There's even a grappling arm that can be extended to grab things and bring it back into the craft. So this is a man-made craft. This is what was created by a description to Mark McCandlish from one of the witnesses that went to an Air Force base in California, and he saw 3 of these craft, and one of them was like this, where the part of the side was open and he could see inside of it. And so based on the description, Mark McCandlish was able to create this diagram, which is seen in the left. I've actually got it in a much larger format. It's about almost 3 feet by 2 feet, and it's like a blueprint.
Okay, yeah, I see. We are getting down about 2.5 minutes of the show here. Boy, this has been interesting.
I could squeeze in the last few if you like.
Okay, all right, let's do it.
I'm going to go for it. So here's the famous Tic Tacs that we're seeing, right? Notice the protrusions on the bottom. These are electrical discharge probes that essentially, even on this one on the left, sometimes they have little round spheres. They're designed to discharge through the atmosphere so that they move and glide very easily. This is what the military are seeing. These are man-made. The Navy may not even be aware that these are military assets. And so they may be engaging with them, and foolishly, if they start to shoot at them, I suspect these things will retaliate. That may be the reason why they're buzzing around the ships. Are some of these extraterrestrial? Possible, but they're more likely to be man-made, and they're being man-made by the U.S. military. So that's part of what's going on. And then we got, when they do crash retrievals, particularly Roswell, they were looking at beings that were dead, unfortunately, and they were looking at the DNA, and somebody got the bright idea, we could probably clone these types of beings. They tried cloning. I think some of them were successful, but not all the time. So they went into robotics. And this picture on the left shows a being that had been kicked at. Apparently, it was trying to grab an individual. Maybe he was going to be abducted. And this man fought back and kicked it in the side. And when he did that, he opened up the side, and there's all this electronic circuitry. This isn't the only instance where somebody has encountered one of these beings, fought back, scratched at the face, and pulled out off the eye covering, and seeing electronic circuitry behind it. In other words, these things are man-made. They are designed to look like little grays. So the problem becomes now, what is a real true gray and what is a man-made gray? And the man-made grays are referred to as programmable life forms.
Yeah.
And the next photo is a capture of an ET being. This is an actual photograph that was captured in Virginia, Brazil. And the person that touched the being unfortunately died, probably from cross contamination or transmission of bacteria. Point being, don't touch ET beings if you don't know what you're touching, because you don't know what you may be picking up or transmitting back to that creature. The next one was taken of a being in Italy. It was coming out of a sort of an eggshell or a pod, and shows that it got up and it's walking, but it seems to be somewhat mutated or injured in some fashion, not knowing why. Here's another one of night crawlers seen in Fresno, California. These appear to be just legs with eyes and a body. I've had in this one orbs. This was in my backyard. My nephew and his wife were being photographed, and these orbs showed up at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And in this next one, which is the final image, is the light beings. And they have been seen not only in different countries. I've actually found one on Mars. So we're looking at different types of extraterrestrial intelligence coming to our planet. And that's it. And if people want to get my books, they can get them from Indigo in Canada, chapters in Canada, or they can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Hudson Books, Booktopia, Book World, etc. Take a look. You have to order them online, but I tell you, I have a NASA doctor who is going to purchase all of my books for the NASA library. She was that impressed with what I had written.
Yep, and I am too. I am impressed also. You got an awful lot of pictures here. It's getting very complicated. Now we can see that some of the extraterrestrials are also man-made and electronically carried out. Same thing with the UFOs. Some of them are ours, some of them are
That's
not.
right.
So
Yeah.
how do we know?
And that's the whole point, is that we have to start re-looking at things and not jumping to conclusions. I don't say that that people haven't been abducted, but I'm questioning whether the abduction is a genuine ET or a programmable life form. And that's the thing that we need to examine at this point.
Yeah, or then there are also abductees that talk about the fact that when they got abducted, got on the ship and started walking around, they saw Air Force uniformed people on the craft.
Exactly. And
so they were being had, boy, royally. But gosh, we're over already. So thank you very much for being with us. This was really interesting.
Well, you're very welcome. And if we have a chance to do this again, we can delve into a lot more, as well as many other related subjects on this.
Yeah, I absolutely would like to have you come back and maybe go deeper into. There are more pictures you have that you didn't show too. So.
Oh yeah, this is just a drop in the bucket from what I've got.
Yeah. All right. So, well, thank you very much, and
you're very welcome.
So then, and to the listeners and the viewers out there, until next time,